癌症作为重病之王，几个世纪以来成为威胁人类健康的世界性难题。在全球许多地区，治疗癌症的药物仍难以企及，令患者的抗癌之路步履维艰。百济神州作为全球肿瘤治疗创新公司，一直在不断尝试、探索。
Beijing is changing that. We've built a company differently from the very beginning. It's built to do great science and to deliver impactful medicines while also addressing affordability with strategic cost and time advantages.
百济神州的创立，就是为了帮助全球更多的患者和他们的家人。我们相信，通过推动生物医药研发模式的变革，我们能够为全世界的癌症患者带来更多可及可负担的创新药。
怀揣患者为先的使命，每一步跨越皆为患者全力以赴。为了研发出更多挽救生命的创新药物，我们不断突破生命科学边界，挑战未解难题。从实验室到临床，我们汇聚全球研发人才，打造了极具差异化的研发管线。通过兼具质量及效率的独特研发模式，将世界各地的患者纳入新药研发格局。为了持续供应全球患者，我们构建了大规模、智能化的全球产业化布局，严守世界一流的质量标准，星夜兼程，全力保障患者用药安心。为了令创新药物普惠全球，我们建立了科学为本的商业模式。核心自主研发药物百越泽、百泽安，不断开创零的突破，领航新药出海进程。在中国，我们全力推动医疗服务下沉基层，助力实现健康中国2030宏伟愿景。我们坚信，改变是治愈未来的良方。在百济神州，我们积极履行企业责任，以向善的力量努力回馈社会。为了每一次希望，每一份荣耀，全球百济人正在前赴后继。攻破癌症是一场持久战，秉持百创新药、济世惠民的初心，我们跨越国界，为改善全球健康携手奋进。我们坚信，终有一天，癌症将不再成为人类生命与幸福的威胁。
Thank you so much, dear distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening to you all. I am from Tai'an City Central Hospital. My name is Dr. Wang. Tai'an City derives from the Tai Mountain in China. Tai'an Central Hospital is located at the foot of the Taishan Mountain. It's a comprehensive tertiary level 3A hospital with different specialties. It's a great honor for me to serve as the chairperson and moderator for today's great session on behalf of the hospital. It's a great honor for me to have all of you here to participate in this meeting supported by CMEA and eChina Health, sponsored by Beijing. So this evening, we'll be talking about the holistic management of clinical trials and the strategies for clinical research center management. It's a great pleasure to talk with experts from Heidelberg University. For today's meeting, we have bilingual simultaneous translation between Chinese and English. So if you have any questions, you can unmute yourself, or you can also type in the chat box. And next, we'll have Professor Peng, the chairperson from the China side, to give us a opening remark. Welcome, Professor Peng.
有请彭院长。
Professor Peng, please.
王院长，彭院长那边一。
Sorry, Professor Peng is encountering a technical issue, so we'll move on with the next chairperson. Okay, so the next chairperson is Dr. Xinguang from Shandong Cancer Hospital. Welcome. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes, we can. Hello, so distinguished Professor Steffen Luntz, Professor Antje Blank, thank you so much for your participation, and thanks for having me. My name is Xinguang from Shandong Cancer Hospital. It's a great honor to serve as the co-chair from the China side to communicate and discuss with professors from Heidelberg University of Germany. Today, we are gathering here on behalf of China side and Germany side to talk about clinical research management. This is indeed an academic feast and a really good opportunity for collaboration. Our hospital is a leading cancer center nationwide, focusing on the comprehensive treatment for different types of cancers. And we also know that University of Heidelberg has a really long history with a lot of proton and other radiation therapy. I think we're also building our proton therapy center, and this is such a great opportunity for us to promote the collaboration between China and Germany to further benefit our patients from the two countries. I would like to again deliver my sincere welcome to all of our guests from Germany, and I would like to thank our organizers and sponsors for your great support. We hope that today's academic meeting will be very inspirational and promote our clinical trials towards a higher quality manner. And we today are going to talk about the challenges and experience during our conductance of clinical trials to further contribute to global collaborations. I would wish the meeting a complete success. And I would like to say sorry for you because I am in a Hong Kong airport about to travel back to Shandong. Maybe I cannot keep online for the whole meeting, so I would like to apologize in advance. Thank you so much for excellent remarks. And next, I would like to give a special introduction to Dr. Steffen Luntz from Heidelberg University Hospital. Dr. Steffen Luntz has really deep background in oncology, and he has also abundant experience in management of clinical trials. Today, he'll be giving us an opening remark and an excellent talk. So now, without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Luntz to give us an opening remark.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to give you some deep insights how we organize clinical trials at a university hospital in Germany. It is really a pleasure to bring this to you, and I'm looking forward to give my talk in a few minutes. So shall I directly start? Hello?
Maybe not. Maybe let's wait for the moderator to chair your session. They need to introduce you first.
Okay.
And just a moment, we're waiting for the co-chair of the meeting, Professor Peng. We apologize for that. Just a moment. Professor Peng is also encountering some technical issues. He cannot get online. So we can proceed to the next session. Okay, so I think we can start our next session. And Professor Peng from Tai'an Central Hospital will be moderating this session. Professor Peng, please. Thank you, Dr. Wang, for your introduction. Dear chairpersons of the meeting, dear Professor Luntz and Professor Blank, good evening and good morning to you all. So, our first speaker would be Professor Luntz. As we have already introduced, Professor Luntz has really abundant experience in clinical trials. So, welcome, Professor Luntz.
So thank you very much. You should see my screen now. And I will give you a practical insight how we organize clinical trials at a university hospital in Heidelberg. And I have no conflicts of interest to declare. And my agenda is, as I said, organizing of clinical trials from a practical perspective. And I give a short introduction to our organization and to Heidelberg, the University Hospital of Heidelberg, and then a deeper insight for investigator-initiated trials and also for company-sponsored trials, different aspects on that. So a short view on Heidelberg. It's a very romantic town, only 160,000 inhabitants. And you see here our old castle and the old bridge, one of the most famous visited locations in Germany. And when you look from the castle down to the village, you see in the background the university area and the medical hospitals. And this is where I am sitting at the moment. It's 12 o'clock noon in Heidelberg at the moment. The university hospital is quite big. Also, we have only 160,000 inhabitants in Heidelberg. We have over 85,000 full-time inpatients in the hospital per year and more than 1 million outpatient visits. So the hospital is in duty for a very big area, much bigger than the town of Heidelberg. And the medical faculty of the university has, of course, the task of academic teaching students to become a medical doctor and to perform research. And it is, by the way, the oldest university in Germany, more than 600 years old. When we focus on clinical trial, it's our opinion that a university hospital, and I think you all agree, has the opportunity to combine widest clinical experience, scientific interest and expertise, and the access to patients as a unique selling point to participate in clinical trials. And this is independent whether you focus on commercial clinical trials or non-commercial clinical trials. So let's first look at the non-commercial clinical trials. We call them the so-called investigator-initiated trials, and how such projects develop from an academic perspective. We have, of course, a lot of non-clinical science and preclinical testing, and from this testing, there comes up some ideas that might be interesting for the clinic. And if the clinical situation fits to this non-clinical science, then there might be the decision by clinical investigators to perform a clinical trial. And those trials then become so-called investigator-initiated trials. And the investigator has to be supported by a lot of infrastructure so that he is able to run such a clinical trial. When we look on the organizational structure of investigator-initiated trials, this is somehow special because you have on the platform of the university hospital and the medical faculty, the lead coordinating investigator who is on the one hand the scientist, and on the other hand, also the principal investigator for his study site. And he wants to run the clinical trial, and the university hospital will act as a sponsor. That means being responsible for the whole trial for the lead coordinating investigator. Then you apply for funding because we run only clinical trials that are funded. Otherwise, you couldn't really adhere to all rules and regulations that has to be considered performing clinical trials. And if you have the funding, then you need additional supporting infrastructure like project management, statistics, clinical monitoring, data management on validated data systems, and safety reporting. And perhaps depending on the project, of the focus of the project, further tasks like pharmacy, imaging, tissue bank, or local laboratory, and so on. This all together is the structure of the investigator-initiated trials, and when you perform it multi-site, as a multi-site or multi-centric trial, you only will ask additional hospitals to be part of the full trial. The impact of such investigator-initiated trials is quite huge. You can also use these academic trials to get medical devices CE marked, that means ready for the market, or to build up evidence to get use procedures in the health insurance system. So this is really very important also for the medical opportunities for all the patients. And these examples are projects that we run in Heidelberg during the last decades of years. As I mentioned, the university hospital acts as a sponsor of such academic clinical trials. And if you look at the sponsor definition according to the ICH GCP guidelines, I assume that you are aware of them. There's defined that the sponsor is an individual, a company, or an institution or organization which takes responsibility for the initiation, management, and financing of a clinical trial. That means for a university hospital that takes over the sponsorship for the local investigators, they have to build up special infrastructures that they can really rely on the tasks that they take over, and everything is in a good manner. And what you have to consider is that for investigator-initiated trials, you have some different interests. The scientist, the physician who is a lead coordinating investigator, he wants to perform his science. Of course, he wants to apply for third-party funding and to offer his own patients modern therapies, and at the end, he wants to publish the results. The employee, the university hospital who takes over the sponsorship, has to ensure that for all studies together, there is a cost recovery of all activities, that the funding is sufficient to perform all the trials. And we have more than many hundreds in Germany, in Heidelberg, that run in parallel. And the university hospital has to protect his own staff for any liability coming out of these trials, and of course to adhere to anti-corruption policy. And there's a third party, the donors who support financially the trial, and that might be also, and very often it is the case, a supporting company, for example, a pharmaceutical or medical device company. And they, of course, want to support studies that have at the end positive results. And they want to be sure to be able to use the data economically. And if there's a patentable invention, that they have the right for this patent. And of course, they are not the sponsors of the trial, therefore they want a minimization of the risk of liability on their own. And therefore, the university hospital, as a sponsor of all these trials, has to build up some infrastructure. And I would like to introduce the infrastructure that we have in place in Heidelberg, but at many other locations, university locations in Germany as well, the Sponsor Quality Assurance Unit. And I give a deep outside view how this organization works. It is organized in such a way that you have the sponsor of the trial, and meaning the medical faculty and the university hospital, represented by an own legal department. And for the lead coordinating investigator, who is the person who at the end performs the trial and makes the decision to do the trial, they execute an internal contract with delegating all sponsor tasks to these lead coordinating investigator. A signed contract between the legal department and the lead coordinating investigator. And also all contracts that has to be executed outside of the university hospital will be signed by the legal department of the sponsor. For example, for contract research organization, other trial sites, whatever you want. Internally, we have the sponsor quality assurance unit that gives, from the beginning on of the trial, and mandatory advice. And without this positive advice, the trial is not allowed to apply for ethic vote or approval by competent authority. And also there are some further organizational steps that we have an eye and the sponsor oversight for the running trials. At the end, there's also an audit process that such academic trials will be audited by the sponsor quality assurance unit, and the report of the audit with the findings, minor, major, I don't know how critical, comes to the legal department so that the sponsor knows what's going on in the trials where he is legally liable. So we have, with some changes in the law, a new opportunity to keep the sponsor oversight, especially for the academic clinical trials, because we have one electronic system all over Europe, harmonized all over Europe, the so-called clinical trial information system that you have to use to apply for approval of competent authority for all drug trials. And this is also true for investigator-initiated trials. And this system allows us to act as a sponsor administrator. That means there's one person for the sponsor, University Hospital Heidelberg, and every investigator who wants to apply for his approval using this CITES system has to be approved by the sponsor administrator as a medium-level administrator in the system to apply for approval of the trial. And this gives us the opportunity to only give green light for the medium-level administrator when this mandatory advice, as I mentioned before, has a good result and a positive result. What are the advantages of this procedure? We have an overview through central sponsor administrative office, means sponsor oversight, very important if you are acting as such a big university hospital and medical faculty. And we can set up own internal criteria, example given the mandatory consultation and additional rules and standards that has to be considered by performing the trial. The disadvantage, of course, that this is an additional administrative burden also outside the study team, but we think it's worth to do so. And as I mentioned, we also provide this sponsor quality assurance unit provides some standard operating procedures to the study sites and the coordinating investigator so that we can ensure that he considers the main aspects that has to be done when you run a clinical trial. And there's another very important structure, and I'm the director of this structure, that is the so-called Coordination Center for Clinical Trials. And this is somehow an academic contract research organization providing all the relevant tasks that you need for the day-to-day management of clinical trials, like project management and statistics, data management, clinical monitoring, and safety management. And these tasks can support the trial so that we can ensure that the trial is in a good mood and in a good way and will be performed successfully. What is the agenda for the KKS? We support academic and company-sponsored trials, but 95% we run more than 100 clinical trials and 95% are academic. The company-sponsored trials mostly are supported by commercial contract research organizations, what exactly, at the end, exactly do the same like the KKS. We support all aspects of clinical trials, and we are independent from university departments. What is very important, we are not close related to the surgical department or internal or oncology department, but this makes also our duty so interesting because we deal every day with all different indications of medicine. And at the end, we have to reach a kind of cost recovery, but academic clinical trials never are really fully paid. There's all the time a little lack of money. And we are working together in a KKS network all over Germany because such structures like the KKS in Heidelberg with more than 100 staff members are located all over Germany. And in the beginning, we were only 12 funded by a public grant. And now they're all over Germany, 29 such organizations out of 36 medical faculties organized in a network, and we bring the procedures and how we work and what we do together in this network. Many of the trials are supported by companies, and for this I would like to introduce some different kind of investigator-initiated trials that we have to different during the last years. One kind is a real investigator-initiated trial where the company supports the study, but it is not a full payment. And there might be, you plan the trial, you conduct the trial, and the company gives some money. And then you analyze the data and write an abbreviated study report according to the E3 study synopsis. Perhaps you are familiar with this. And then if the data are interesting for commercial use, then there's a right to first hearing of the funding company that they might pay a full market price to get the right to have the commercial second use of the data after the investigator, the scientist, has published the results. And on the other hand, we notice that there is also the interest of pharmaceutical companies to support investigator-initiated trials from the beginning on. And from the beginning on, they know that they want to get the second use of the results. And therefore, they have also to pay from the beginning on a full market price for the funding of the trial. And then it is analyzed, and then we have the task to write a full report like E3 so that the data can also be used for regulatory purpose. And then this commercial second use after academic publishing the results is by the company. After focusing on investigator-initiated trials, I want to share the last two slides focusing on company-sponsored trials, also a very important activity for us here at university, also to earn money, we must say. And for company-sponsored trial, that means that the company is also the sponsor of the trial, and he asked one investigator, one clinician to be the lead coordinating investigator, perhaps from Heidelberg, but it can be also from another hospital, and they contract their own contract research organization or do it internally, the project management, biometrics, and so on, the tasks that I provide with the KKS to academic clinical trials and all further tasks. And the lead coordinator investigator will act as a study site, of course, and might suggest further sites to the company that might be well suited to perform as a multicentric trial. This is how a company-sponsored trial is organized. And for these company-sponsored trials, we have also an internal structure that's called START, or Startup Support for Clinical Trials. And it is staffed with 2 persons paid by the medical faculty, and they support the clinicians during the feasibility process for company-sponsored trials. That means it is a central point of contact to the sponsors, to the pharmaceutical companies who are searching for trial sites. They calculate centrally the case payment and also consider all involved parties like radiation also, and perform also the budget negotiations with the companies. And the success is that we have attractive cost recovery and that we have during the critical review of study schedule for the central calculation together, of course, with the clinician, we have a very reflected decision for or against participation in clinical trials. And that, as a result, we notice that we have a reduction of trials in total, but a reduction only of the trials where we had in the past low or non-recruiting. And therefore, this is really a success story. Lower trials with cost coverage and a reduction of the trials where we normally said, oh yes, we want to take part, and when it comes, then you notice you do not have the patients. This is how this works. The company goes to the START structure directly, single point of contact. They look for the designated study site and the associated partners. They calculate and perform the negotiations and gives the contract to the legal department. Very successful, and the faculty pays the staff, but at the end, it is good invested money. So I conclude that the conduction of clinical trials, commercial and investigator-initiated, is mandatory for a university hospital. I hope you agree. The support has to be provided concerning regulatory oversight and conductance, and it should be well organized to really run professional and successful clinical trials. Thanks for your interest, and I'm looking forward to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Luntz. You have given us a very comprehensive review about clinical trials and IITs. Especially as investigators, how could we establish clinical coordinating centers as sponsors and as academic personnel? How could we conduct and participate in clinical trials? The second part talks about company-sponsored clinical trials. How could we implement clinical trials? And also, how about the commercial use of clinical trial data? Thank you very much, Professor Luntz. And next, we'll be having a roundtable discussion. Let me introduce the panelists to you. From the China side, We have 5 panelists. From the Germany side, we have Professor Luntz and Professor Blank. In the China side, we have Dr. Xinguang, Dr. Li Ying, Dr. Cui Xin, and Dr. Meng Li, and Dr. Xuemei from Qilu Hospital. So we'll start with Professor Blank, maybe. And Professor Luntz, you can start the discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Steffen. We work together a lot, and this supportive structure of the university for the university hospital conducting trials is really one of the enabling factors for us to conduct trials, and I will come back to that in my talk later on. It is very important to focus on those things that we may not have from the academic point of view, which, for example, is data management, project management, which are not by nature in some of our academic areas. So therefore, we really value this support a lot.
So perhaps to focus on the question how evaluate the safety and effectiveness of novel therapies, you have to be aware when you conduct a trial with not well-established therapies, you really have to be aware that you are, as an investigator, the first person that might notice any issues for safety. Effectiveness is perhaps not the thing you have to consider on the day-to-day business, but the safety is very important that you notice this really every day when you are at the patient side and performing clinical trials. But the most important thing is that you not harm the patient. Or if you notice there is an issue, that you can mirror that to the other colleagues who perform the trial, that the sponsor can react and consider how to amend the trial. For this, we have in Heidelberg a very well-organized safety department that is contacted within directly, nearly within 24 hours. With a serious adverse events or any issue of special interest, event of special interest, and then we escalate to the sponsor, to the coordinating investigator to see how we react and how we deal with it. And I think this is very important, especially when you perform investigator-initiated trials. For commercial clinical trials, of course, the companies bring the structure with them, but for your own trials, you have also to consider this in a very professional manner.
Thank you very much. And as we can see here, the preset question for panel discussion is how can we evaluate the safety and effectiveness of novel therapies for multiple myeloma, including CAR-T and bispecific antibodies within the context of clinical trials? So participants from China, Dr. Xinguang from Shandong Cancer Hospital. Do you have any comments on that?
Good evening.
Thank you very much.
President Wang, President Peng, President Teng, and thanks Professor Luntz for a very clear presentation. Jinan is very similar to Heidelberg. We are both surrounded by mountains. I'm from the lymphoma department of Shandong Cancer Hospital. I mainly study lymphoma and myeloma. Recently, our RT clinical trial accepted by Cancer Journal. This study, we focus on the diffuse large B-cell lymphoma with double expression of MEK and BCL2, which is usually only responsive to the R-CHOP regimen. So we use BTK inhibitor, danubrutinib plus R-CHOP, and improve the outcome of this kind of patients. But I have a question to ask Professor Luntz. According to current regulation, if a new drug has no indication for use in the clinic, if we use it in the RT research, all drugs must be donated.
So if I get it right, you ask how we organize when we use...
how to get the funding of the new drug for our RT research? Thank you.
So we have such research, of course, and I think Antje Blank will talk a little bit about this, how we deal with this. But we have really first-in-man studies, but you have to consider this in a special way and be really aware of the situation that you are the first site where the person is exposed, sometimes healthy volunteers. You deal with oncology, then you use normally patients, but of course, this is a special issue, but it is supported by the same structures as I introduced during my talk.
Can I ask for some clarification? Are you asking about repurposing drugs that have already an indication for another disease and you want to do an IIT for a disease which is not yet licensed? Yeah. Okay, this is always a big problem for funding because we deal with rights and licenses, and of course they are never with the universities. And on the other hand, if you apply for public funding, they ask who will benefit from your data, and that is mostly the company that that is marketing the drug. That is a problem. I mean, there are a few ways around. One situation is that you get in contact with the company and ask if they are interested in partially funding a trial, or if they are interested in funding a trial with agreements on the license rights, if you get some data that really supports a new indication for them, of course. Our experience, however, is that in the last 10 years, this has changed dramatically. 10 years ago, many companies were interested in joining such projects and just exploring new indications. Lately, they are more afraid. They don't want to have any kind of research which is not completely under their control. And you are absolutely right. Funding the drug then is a major issue because especially if the drug is still under patent, it is very expensive. You have a hard time to get public funding because you need big sums, which are normally not so easy to get in public funding. I'm not sure we as researchers and as physicians and clinical trialists can really solve that problem. The best thing maybe is to convince the company that your indication that you want to explore is promising. But I know that you're not always successful in doing so because the company has their own agenda. And of course, they first calculate what will be the reimbursement afterwards and the net present value. And we look more into new opportunities for patients in situations where there is a high treatment need. So I think we don't have a good solution for your answer, but we definitely see the problems and challenges around that.
Thanks.
And now I will hand over to Professor Li, who is also from Shandong First Medical University, famous hematologist. Thank you, Professor Teng, for your kind introduction. Thank you, Professor Luntz, for the wonderful talk. I'm from the hematology department of the Shandong Provincial Hospital. I'm a hematologist. Actually, in 1999, we have been accredited as the clinical trial foundation across the whole country. And also in the past 20 years, we were involved in multiple clinical trials. And also we're involved in more than 30 different clinical trials. So that's why I'm also very happy to join today's meeting. Well, for this panel discussion topic, for the multiple myeloma innovative therapies such as the CAR-T cell therapy or bispecific antibodies, in our clinical trials, how can we better assess the efficacy and the safety? Actually, for CAR-T and bispecific antibodies, they are still quite new to the treatment of the multiple myeloma. Therefore, in the clinical trial process, firstly, for those drugs, just like Professor Luntz mentioned, a very important thing is that we need to pay attention to the safety. So, firstly, we need to guarantee the safety for all the subjects. Then we can proceed with the clinical trial. And also in the very beginning of the clinical trial, we also need to do very cautious protocol design. And then based on the protocol of the study at the recruitment, we also need to do very stringent screening. For example, for CAR-T and bispecific antibodies, sometimes we may have the ICANS and other neurotoxicities. Therefore, for the CNS-involved patients, we cannot include them into the CAR-T or bispecific antibody clinical trials. So we need to be very stringent in the recruitment of the subjects, and we need to exclude the high-risk patients. At the same time, in the process of the clinical trial, we should spare no efforts to have the best control of all the steps per the SOP. And once the patient has any AE that is induced by CAR-T or bispecific antibody, especially CRS events, and also based on the specific AE, we would also follow the SOP to mitigate their AEs and also to better salvage those patients. And also for the efficacy treatment, and we also need to follow the protocol, especially for the multiple myeloma, especially if they have the extramedullary lesion. We also need to do the PET-CT and to check the bone marrow situation. And then we can have full assessment of the efficacy of the treatment. And also during the clinical trial, I think the top priority is still the safety of the patients. So Professor Lu's lecture, I have a better understanding of the IIT as well as the company-sponsored trial. So I understand in your center, you have very comprehensive infrastructure and organization as well as the SOP. With all those combined, you can better protect the subjects and also better guarantee their safety and treatment efficacy. And I sincerely hope that in the future, we can have more opportunities to learn from you and still have the communication. And so for the interest of the time, for the following panelists, please confine your comments to 3 minutes. So Professor Cui, please. Thank you, Professor Teng, for your kind introduction.
At first, I'm going to thank the meeting chairmen Dr. Peng and Dr. Xing, and also nice to meet Dr. Luntz and Dr. Blank online. We know in up to 1/3 of patients, significant toxicity is directly related to the induction of the powerful immune effector response occur. So, we know CRS is one of the most common side effects of CAR T-cell therapy, usually presenting with fever, chills, fatigue, and other symptoms. Although it can be completely predicted, it can be detected and treated in time by monitoring physiological indicators such as the patient's temperature, heart rate, and blood pressure. So, interventions for CRS including we know as glucocorticoids, coid, and tolmab. Predicting ICANS is another common side effect that presents with symptoms such as cognitive impairment and delirium and loss of motor skills. Recent studies have found that the occurrence of ICANS can be predicted by monitoring the serum phosphorus value. So hypophosphatemia is closely related to ICANS. So the symptoms of ICANS can be detected at an early stage, and intervention can be carried out by this monitor. I also noticed that there are other studies which focus on gut flora unbalance want to respond these questions. This hints us that clinical samples should be collected to predict the side effects and value the efficacy of different drugs treat these side effects. This work, I think this work should be based on our laboratory of the university. So at the end, I have a question that not all myeloma patients respond the same to CAR T therapy, especially due to difference in genetics and tumor characteristics in myeloma. High-risk factors such as tumor burden and poor risk cytogenetics further complicate the treatment outcomes. So how can we identify which patients will benefit the most in CAR T therapy? Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Cui Xin. So the next panelist is Meng Li, and Professor Meng Li, please. Thank you, Professor Teng, for your kind introduction. Respected chairperson, I also want to thank the organizer and chairperson for giving me this opportunity to learn. Following the prior introduction, I want to say that I'm from the Tai'an City Central Hospital. I'm an oncology physician, and also for Tai'an City Central Hospital, under Professor Wu and Professor Teng's leadership, as well as Director Dong's effort in the clinical trial field, we have got a lot of progress. And also we do have many important achievements in the clinical practices. And during our clinical daily work, we are actually involved in more solid tumor trials. And just now, Professor Luis shared with us about the IIT as well as the management process. For the IIT, I do have many important takeaways for the multiple myeloma innovative therapies. Just now, the panelists shared with us a lot about CAR-T. So here I want to share with you more about the bispecific antibodies, because for multiple myeloma, especially in the RR multiple myeloma patients, bispecific antibody has shown very good efficacy, offering new hope to our patients for the safety and efficacy of bispecifics. Actually, in the clinical trial assessment for the bispecific antibodies during the clinical trial protocol design, we need to have the conceptual understanding of the bispecific targets, and also for the bispecific targets, for the general safety of the drug, we need to have the preliminary understanding of it. And also, in the whole process, we also need to follow very closely with those patients, because once they have AE, we can also have very clear judgment. And also in the clinical trial, we hope that they can finish the whole trial in a very safe manner. And also in the clinical trial process, especially for IIT trials, or for other GCP-related trials. In terms of the protocol design, for the efficacy assessment, we also need to be very stringent. So based on our protocol, in the pre-specified time period, we will do the pre-specified tests. For example, for multiple myeloma, in the efficacy assessment, we need to do like sequencing and other workups. So based on those testing results, we can have a clear understanding as how the bispecifics work for the multiple myeloma, especially RR multiple myeloma. That's all from me. Thank you. Now I'd like to hand over to Professor Xu from Qilu Hospital. Thank you, Professor Ten, for the kind introduction. I also
Professor Luntz und Professor Blank. Vielen Dank für Ihren wunderbaren Vortrag. Ich heiße Miao Xu aus der Abteilung für Hämatologie des Qilu Krankenhauses. Ich mag die Universität Heidelberg sehr. Der other campus ist wirklich wunderschön. Entschuldigung, ich kann nur ein bisschen Deutsch sprechen. Nächster werde ich auf Englisch fragen. So in the clinical trial you mentioned, you introduces the processes for the domestic studies, right? So I would like to ask whether, there is more like differences due to the criteria for global or in other words, international studies when you design the studies, and would there be more challenging issues regarding how to deal with the adverse reactions and also to evaluate the efficacy? Thank you. Vielen Dank.
So just short answer, focusing on the time, but I think, of course, international studies are more complex, and you have to, for safety, you really have to be sure that all the information comes together at one point. That is very important, that you do not lose time because the study is performed in different countries, and therefore the rules for safety reporting, or if you define AESI's adverse events of special interest, should be for all participating sites exactly the same, and you have to be sure that there's one single point of contact where the data comes together in time, and that there are persons who look at the data and decide whether you have a safety issue or not. And I think this is internationally the same, and at the end you want data from the whole trial at one place, and therefore you build such a structure also up for the safety reporting during the running trial.
Okay, thank you very much.
好，谢谢徐淼教授哈。
Thank you, Professor Xuemei. Thank you again, Professor Luntz, for your great talk, and all of our panelists, including Professor Blank's great discussion. Next, we'll move on to our next session, moderated by Professor Shen Wu. Professor Shen is from Shandong Provincial Hospital with abundant experience in GCP and clinical trials. Welcome, Professor Shen. Thank you very much. Great pleasure to serve as the moderator for our second half. We have witnessed a great first half of the meeting. Now we'll move on to our second session. We'll start with Professor Antje who will be talking about holistic management of clinical trials, a sites and PI's perspective. Now, welcome. Professor Blank is from Germany, Heidelberg University Hospital. He is also the head of pharmacology. Now, welcome, Professor Blank.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Sheng, for the nice introduction, and good evening to China, good morning to the US. My name is Antje Blank. I'm heading the Early Clinical Trial Unit Pharmacology. I'm a clinical pharmacologist, physician clinical pharmacologist by training, but we are actually a department of internal medicine here at the Heidelberg University Hospital. I have focused on translational research for basically all my professional life. I started in phase 3, but now for more than 15 years, I'm basically in phase 1 and 2. And I'm happy to present the Heidelberg University view more from a sites and PI perspective. So shall I start the presentation?
Yes, please.
Yes. You should now be able to see the presentation. So I talk about the holistic management of clinical trials from a sites and PI's perspective. I have nothing to declare. And Steffen has already introduced you to some of the details of our university hospital. I'm actually sitting about here in this area. And the numbers might be looking small for you because I know your cities are much bigger. Heidelberg is not such a big city. We are only a bit over 160,000 inhabitants, but the university hospital, in fact, is quite a large university hospital for Germany. And what makes Heidelberg a special place is that we have even more additional institutes around the university hospital, public research institutes like the very famous German Cancer Research Center. You have a European Molecular Biology Lab, Max Planck Institutes, and all that together makes this a very lively biomedical campus. The university hospital itself has put on its agenda key research areas. And the biggest one, by far the biggest one, is oncology research, also in connection with this German Cancer Research Center, which is next door. Neuroscience, infection and immunology is another focus, and cardiovascular research. And the university hospital is very well aware that it must be a strategic objective that you care for your patients by science, that the best medical care is supported. If you have new therapies, if you support translation, if you support investigator-initiated trials wherever you see a therapeutic need, but also at the same time, equally important that you support sponsor trials, because there are many good ideas in many companies worldwide, and those ideas can only become a treatment if they have the patients in their trials. But Therefore, I want to tell you a little bit about challenges for clinical trial implementation in an academic setting, how I see it. I want to introduce you to our department, just as an example, supporting research on the campus, tell you about our early clinical trial unit, and give you one example, which is really a lighthouse example for a successful campus development here in Heidelberg. The challenges and barriers to translation, and maybe the challenges to translation are really the first hindering point for new therapies, but also the challenges for conducting clinical trials in an academic setting are diverse. And the first 3 bullet points that you see here are more in a socioeconomic perspective, because we know that translational projects have a huge collaborative and interdisciplinary effort. They must be early on international. The treatments are very specific. You don't find patients just in one place. So the author credits, we know in an academic way, mainly go to the first and the last authors, but these translational projects have many authors, many parents that need to be respected. Also, when we do translation in the academic background, some expertise is not commonly available at the academic hospitals. In Heidelberg, for example, it's not so easy to find expertise for pharmaceutical technology. Then another challenge in the academic setting is that industry-sponsored research in academia sometimes need kind of a justification and is not equally valued. And last but not least, it has been touched before already, the academic funding is difficult for clinical trials, is difficult for translation. There are many unforeseen issues that occur during translation and also during clinical trials, and this is normally not accounted for in public funding. So all this is something that needs to be changed. It's more political, it's political academic, so we need to work on that altogether. The last one, implementation of trials, is something we can do something practical about it in our hospitals, because implementation of trials is competition with patient care, and we can do better if we have the best site support and if we really have a good recruitment performance. And for a trial site and from a principal investigator's perspective, this can be ensured by a surrounding which gives you qualified staff, and legal and finance, needs a law department, it needs education and training is academic, of course, for physicians and so on, but also we need trial-specific training, and this is something that the KKS provides for us. They have their special curriculum to train physicians, study nurses, trial staff from different backgrounds to perform well in clinical trials. We also need finance tools, because this is not the normal patient care finance, and therefore we need finance tools to be able to first forecast how much a trial will cost, and then also to get the invoices to the sponsors at the end. We need an ethics committee, although this has been changed in Europe. Steffen Luntz has mentioned that we have elevated the level for authorization of trials from the national to the European level, and therefore local ethic committees are not so important anymore for drug trials, but of course still for research overall. More important is the trial-specific services, which has been just shown by Steffen Luntz. For us, this is the KKS Heidelberg, and that we have access to the facilities of a tertiary hospital, that we collaborate within the hospital and have an interdisciplinary exchange. Clinical research and clinical trials can best work within the hospital surrounding, but at the same time, of course, there they compete with patient care and room for patient care. In Heidelberg, we tried to implement the following. You see that here, this is the clinical care. And the clinical departments, they have their patients. And we figured out that for phase 1 and 2, it's very important to have a separate area to conduct these trials. And this is what clinical pharmacology is heading, an early clinical trial unit. And the aim is that we get our recruitment for patient trials from the clinical care. Of course, if we talk about trials with healthy volunteers, which also sometimes are carried out in our unit, we recruit them ourselves from the campus, from the public surrounding. But for patient trials, the recruitment will come from clinical care and goes for phase 1 and 2 into our trial site from clinical pharmacology. And we figured out that within the campus, it's very important to connect, because not every trial can be done at the pharmacological early clinical trial unit. We also need a pediatric unit, which is actually a so-called daughter of our unit. And we have the pneumological unit, which is a little bit away from the main campus here in Heidelberg, and we try to connect. We have the same quality management system. We try to interchange stuff. We have a collaboration which also supports them coming from one to the other side, train, give expertise on, and so on. And then, of course, for phase 3, this is more happening in the decentralized clinical trial units. So, of course, they also get their patients from the clinical care. But phase 3 is mostly done in decentralized clinical trial units in the departments of interest. Let me shortly introduce our department, because we are kind of a special construct also within Germany. And the Department of Clinical Pharmacology and Pharmacoepidemiology focuses on 2 main aspects. One is translation of drug discovery into humans, first in human trials, early phase trials, but equally important, and it should not be forgotten that this is also and must be a big area of research, is the transfer of drug development results, new therapies, into the therapeutic daily routine. If we don't make a drug that has been proven effective, if we don't make it here effective in the real world setting, we fail as physicians. There is part of the, or let's say half of our department is really dealing with drug therapy safety. It's been asked in the panel discussion before, how can we ensure that CAR T cells, bispecific antibodies are well monitored for safety aspects? This is the place where we need to monitor it. Here, everything is well set. In clinical trials, we have WHO, GCP and ICH have done a wonderful job. We collect our AEs in a structured way. We can draw our conclusions. The challenge is to get the safety in the real world setting when very different populations are treated with those drugs, and bispecific antibodies are in clinical routine now. We need drug therapy consulting and medical IT electronic decision support to support drug therapy. But of course, today the focus is more on this part, which is also my part where I'm standing for. It's the pharmacological early clinical trial unit and the network, which is hopefully growing next to the pediatric and the thorax pneumological unit. We hope to collaborate soon with a unit in hemato-oncology and with other different departments, nephrology and so on. And very closely related is also the possibility to have an analytical and biochemistry lab, which is GCLP and ISO certified. This is our clinical trial unit, where we do planning and implementation of translational trials. Early clinical trials, we do a lot of first-in-human trials, but generally we are dealing with phase 0 to 2 trials. We analyze and evaluate pharmacokinetics, dynamics. We analyze genetic data or also overall trial data. We founded the network. I described that before, and our activities are quite diverse. The focus is really on the early phases, but the IMPs are very diverse, from small molecules up to biologicals, including bispecific antibodies, vaccines, and gene therapy. What we currently do not do is CAR T cell therapies, because they are done next door in the IMC, and we have an IMC setting, but the IMC the real IMC of the internal medicine has a higher level of observation, and they are carrying out the CAR T-cell therapies. We do translation trials for the campus, which is very important. If we have a vivid research campus, we need to make sure that all these good ideas somehow reach the clinic. We do also specific phase 1 trials like drug interaction, evaluation of variability, optimization of drug therapy, QTC trials. And we have a special method of microdosing where we try to evaluate drug metabolism and drug interactions with very low doses of drugs, which would still show us the drug interaction, but with low doses, so we can use healthy volunteers in these trials to just evaluate drug interactions. Yeah, we do trials, investigator-initiated trials, a lot of campus research projects, and sponsor-initiated trials where we carry out the site activities. The trial populations is patients in collaboration with basically all clinical departments, although we do have a very close collaboration with the hemato-oncology department, especially myeloma patients. So I was, I liked the question before for the panel discussion, but we also do healthy volunteer studies if we have campus translation projects where we have a first step that needs to be carried out with healthy volunteers. Our unit is quality managed. We are ISO certified. We have 12 beds and 3 daycare places, which seems to be small. But if you really focus on phase 1, this is an on and off job. And sometimes these 12 beds are not enough. But for patients in phase 1, normally you get 1 slot in a trial. And if you have more trials running, maybe you get 3 slots in 1 week, but you don't, I think in our hospital size, we don't need a bigger unit for that. We have an intermediate care setting with a surveillance system. And very important, we are connected to the in-house emergency availability, which of course is very important for the regulatory agencies. The IMC and ICU is next door. We are always in very close collaboration with that. I called it down here, living collaboration. They need to know about our trials. Also, of course, we can't really reserve any beds. Luckily, we don't need them on an everyday basis, but whenever we are in need and whenever a patient experiences an AE that requires IMC or ICU setting, then they are transferred over there. Second important point here is that we have access to the diagnostic and therapeutic options of the whole academic center. This is very important for phase 1 and 2 trials, and that we have a GCP compliant study drug and biostorage sample. It is very important to have an established in-house emergency chain. This is something that has been inspected very often by the regulatory authorities meanwhile. We also have our own analytical chemistry lab, which is especially for campus translations important because for these early projects, very often the quantification of drugs is not yet established anywhere. So they develop and validate assays according to EMA and FDA for the quantification of drugs and metabolites. They also do metabolite identification, and they have a big lab area with a very high number of UPLC coupled tandem mass spectrometry. They do MALDI and DAISY with a 2D quantification of drugs. Of course, the aim would be at the end to have it in 3D, but 2D is already pretty good to see if you have the right drug concentration at your target. Yeah, these are their activities, and I think they are the perfect match next to our patient unit because we need these drug quantification methods. And I wanted to point out that in my aspect, one of the key issues for phase 1 and early trials is a reliable biosampling. We have very valuable samples. In phase 1, normally quite a variety of those: blood cells, urine stool, tissue, liquor, saliva, tears, and so on. And for each campus translation, we have a very long discussion on what are the right analytes, what are the relevance, do we need to look for metabolites, in which source do we find them, how do they need to be worked up and stored. And this is for phase 1, one of the key issues for a successful and reliable data collection in trials. So every team member knows that all these points here, definition of how the samples worked up, need to be sticked on very closely. When we have cooperation trials, then the recruitment is with the clinical partners. We work in a way that they do the recruitment. Of course, the specialist is always the best person to judge if this trial is the right step for a patient or not. They do information and consent because they are the best ones to be able to give them the alternatives in opposite to a trial, and they do the screening. They then hand over their patients for the trial to us, to the early clinical trial unit in pharmacology, and we treat them from the day one in a trial until in oncology trial. Most of the time it's until progression of disease. Of course, in other trials, sometimes it's a defined period. At the end, it's very important also that we ensure that patients at the end of their individual end of their trial, that they are handed over back into the clinical department. And during this time, we need to be in close collaboration and connection with the clinical partners to be able to have the right treatment for all these various diseases. And you will just on the next slide see how many various indications we have in our first in human unit in the clinical pharmacology. So these intersections are very important, that the handover from the clinical partner to us and from us back to the clinical partners has a structured way and ensures that all required information reaches the other side. Since 2005, we have done more than 150 clinical phase 1 and 2 drug trials, and normally within a year we have between 30 and 40 parallel active trials running. And since 2005, we have also conducted 41 first-in-human trials. And you see that the indications are quite variable. They are cardiologic, they are GI, gastrointestinal, infectious disease, of course, oncology, hemato-oncology. This is one of our big focuses, and also rheumatology. The red ones are those that are the so-called campus translational projects that have compounds that have been evaluated and detected in one of the labs here at Heidelberg University campus and made it, most of them by public funding, into a first-in-human trial, which is always a very special success for universities. Luckily, there are some very interesting publications out of that, and I would like to draw your attention to one project from the infectious disease area, which is a very good example for a successful campus translation, and that is the hepatitis D and hepatitis B virus entry inhibitor, formerly called Mercludex-B during the development. Meanwhile, this drug is called Hepcludex with the trade name, and bulevirtide with the international drug name. It's a drug against chronic HBV and HDV infection, which is one of the most severe chronic viral hepatitis infections, which a fast progression to cirrhosis and carcinoma. We have only about 20 million patients worldwide, so it is still an orphan disease, although we know that the co-infection of hepatitis D for an existing chronic hepatitis B infection is not always really looked for. So there might be also some HDV infections that we don't know of. The treatment so far was interferon with a very bad response rate and very high rate of side effects. Here you see the inventor of that molecule, Steffen Urban. The molecule is a very intelligent idea because it's a 47 amino acid peptide, which equals the pre-S domain of the HB virus. And this little part of the whole virus has a high affinity to the sodium taurocolate cotransporting polypeptide, the NTCP receptor, which is the natural bile acid transporter. And also, NTCP is the HBV/HDV entry receptor. So when you can inhibit this receptor here, normally HBV connects to the NTCP receptors and enters the hepatocyte by endocytosis. If you block this NTCP receptor by bulevirtide, there is no further infection, no further endocytosis. As I said, it's a real Heidelberg campus project and campus development. Stefan Urban in molecular virology had the idea, the patent, and did the preclinical work. We did the first in human trial and the phase 1 trial, and we also participated in phase 2 and 3. My dear colleague Steffen Luntz was responsible for many aspects in that development. The KKS Heidelberg supported the translation and the project management, did monitoring, data management, statistics, and pharmacovigilance for many of those trials, not for all. And of course, our clinical colleagues from the gastroenterology unit, internal medicine 4, provided the patients for phase 2 and 3. Sponsors were first the MÜ GmbH, which is a German company. It was a spin-off of the university, and then later on, it was followed by, it was a private company, and it got some funding from Hepatera, and it was finally bought by Gilead for a quite interesting sum of 1.45 billion. And the Heidelberg Medical Faculty got some royalties out of that money. That is also a good good news for the university. The first clinical research was published in 2002. The first in human trial was 2011, and the conditional approval was in August 2020. This is not very fast, as you can see. Maybe most academic projects in translation are not the fastest one, but it's definitely an indication where there was a high treatment need. Yeah, so it's worth to do the way from bench to bedside support translation. And we did talk a lot of the holistic approach to clinical trials today, talking about the fact how you can support translation within a campus would maybe be an idea for a next trial. And you can see here the lately published phase 3 results, where you can see that the mean level of HDV RNA, which is the level of infectivity of the disease and activity of the disease, that with the both treatment arms, this has been tremendously going down over 48 weeks. Apologies. And also at the same time, the liver enzymes normalized in really a high proportion of patients. So it's worth to go that way, to do these clinical trials, even if they are sometimes very exhausting. Thank you very much for listening. Greetings from Heidelberg, and I look forward to the next panel discussion.
I think they are having some connection issue.
I think for this session, we'll move on to our discussion, and dear panelists can share your comments and questions. Many thanks to all the participating panelists. So for this discussion session, we'll be talking about in early phase clinical trials, how do we strike a balance between fostering innovation and ensuring patient safety? We can start with Professor Luntz and Professor Blank. What's your take on this question? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Philip. Perhaps I'll begin. I think you have to be very careful and understand your drug that you want to invest. I think this is the most important part, that you really know to interpret the preclinical data we are talking about first in human, that you interpret the preclinical data and can get the right hints for conducting the first clinical trial, phase 1, often in healthy volunteers. And once again, you really have to ensure that you do not harm the patients, and therefore you should start the study step by step, one patient or one volunteer after the other, and really be aware of what might go wrong, can go wrong, and you really look at that and be very careful with all what you do. And I'm sure that Antje Blank has some more detailed information on that from her practical perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Steffen. I have 3 points for that. How do we strike a balance between fostering innovation and ensuring patient safety? Fostering innovation means we do phase 1 trials. That is one thing. And it is important to always emphasize that also we need to support phase 1 in an academic setting. It is slow. It is maybe only one publication afterwards, and the publication is the best publication if you can report that nothing happens because in the first in human trial you don't look for safety. On the other side, everybody knows these publications where you write nothing happened are not the most interesting ones, but we need to realize and we need to advocate the importance of that step in universities. That is our job from all disciplines. How can we ensure patient safety? I think the guidelines that we have meanwhile are very good. And very often when we think about how should we design the trial, how do we do the slow up titration and so on, when you look into guidelines, they give you real practical guidance on how to design the trial. And it's not so easy to read them. They are not our first sources for education, for example. But I realized that there is so much brain in these guidelines that we really need to look at those guidelines and follow them. And this is the first and most important point to ensure safety. The second point to ensure safety is that we realize that first in human trials for healthy volunteers and at the same time also for patients cannot be done in the normal day-to-day hospital care setting. It needs to be separated from insurance system, public health system. It needs to be done in a place where you are allowed to take the time it takes to safely treat these patients. And last but not least, in this setting, you need to ensure your chain of emergency. That is not always easy. Talking about a separate unit where you do phase 1 trials, that of course means that you have to establish this chain of emergency, and you have to keep all people who might be involved in that chain of emergency, you need to keep them informed. Also, luckily, not every day something happens, and they are luckily not needed very, very often.
感谢两位外方专家的分享。那接下来
Thank you very much, both Chairman doctors. And now we can start with Professor Shen. You can moderate our Chinese panelists. Okay, thank you. And our next panelist will be Dr. Sun Yuping from Shandong Cancer Hospital. Thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I also learned a lot from the previous talks and discussion regarding this topic. I agree with both Professor Luntz and Professor Blank. With bigger innovation, sometimes you have bigger uncertainties during the treatment. Sometimes there could be some potential risks for the subjects or the patient's health. And firstly, Dr. Luntz mentioned we need to have a good understanding about the investigational drug. Firstly, the investigational team need to have some clinical expertise and experience and know how to deal with these AEs and emergencies. They need to have very good knowledge, cutting-edge knowledge. Also, they need to have a very good understanding about the investigational drug by reading the previous papers and data so that you have a better understanding of the potential risks and AEs or AEs of special interest. So, we also mentioned, Dr. Blank also mentioned the emergency access or ICU access, access to Department of Anesthesiology. So we need to get prepared for emergency situations. For example, if there's a cardiology issues, sometimes we need to transfer the patient to another hospital. We need to set up these access for emergency and transferring access. Within the department, you should be able to do something firsthand, but you also need to have a very good access to emergency or ICU. And as Professor Blank mentioned, guidelines and standards are really important for us. We need to stick to the protocol. And for the selection of subjects in early clinical trials during up-titration, it should be patients who fail the standard of care. When they don't have other choices, you can recruit them into clinical trials. So for this group of people, you need to make sure that they have failed the standard of care for now. And when you recruit these patients and enroll these patients, you need also to understand their recent history, their previous history of any complications, AEs, as well as the general condition of the patients. And also, if you can do some genetic testings, NGS testing, it will be also helpful for target selection. So we need to benefit the patients instead of harming the patient. And as in early clinical trials, we face with a lot of uncertainties, and during informed consent, we need to give the patient a thorough understanding of the clinical trials protocol. You also need to tell them that they might be a contributor to the clinical studies. They might be in the control group, and we also need to help them analyze what's best for them. What's the most appropriate clinical trial for them as well. And, during the study conduct, as Professor Blank mentioned, during dose up titration, you need to pay attention that during low dose steps, sometimes we might miss some important safety signals. But we definitely need to pay more attention to these seemingly trivial AEs. Otherwise, at higher doses, it could be a threat to our patients. And another thing is that when patients participate in early phase clinical trials, sometimes it is not out of their willingness. Sometimes they are running out of choices. So psychologically, some patients are actually suffering. So during the clinical trials, if there is any harm to them, it could be a double impact, both psychologically and physically. So we need to have a holistic attention and care for such patients. Although patients spontaneously participate in the study with informed consent, however, we think we still need to pay more attention to them and their benefit and welfare. So in general, for innovative drugs, it's important to keep innovating. However, we also need to balance patient safety with attention to a lot of factors. That's it from me. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sun. It is a very comprehensive review of how to protect patient safety and strike a balance between innovation and patient safety. And next, panelist would be Dr. Cao Lili from First Affiliated Hospital of Shandong First Medical University. Thank you very much for your kind introduction. Dear experts, dear colleagues, greetings to you. I'm from First Affiliated Hospital of Shandong First Medical University. I would like to thank the support from Beijing and like to thank both speakers, Professors Luntz and Professor Blank. The balance between innovation and patient safety is a very good topic. So regarding clinical trials and management of clinical trials and our practice in ethical review, I can share with you 2 points. Firstly, before initiation of the study, we need to have a cautious and rigorous protocol design as well as ethical review. And during the study conduct, patients should have a thorough understanding of clinical trial relevant information. The patient then can decide whether he or she would like to participate in the study, and safety guarantee is really important during the whole process of study. It's a rare opportunity, so I think I have some questions for 2 professors. For Professor Blank, can you talk about including healthy individuals or patients as participants for phase 1 study? What's your take on this? And secondly, if you have healthy individual versus patient as subject for phase 1 study, what is the proportion between the 2 kinds of subjects? And also for Professor Luntz, we have several questions. Firstly, for IIT versus sponsor-initiated study, what's the proportion between the 2? And second question would be for IIT. In your unit, how could you support it with the maximum finding? What's the maximum finding? And third question would be, in Germany, do you have these unlicensed or unlaunched drug or medical device conducting IIT studies? These are the questions. Thank you.
Maybe I start with the questions about the healthy volunteers. Of course, these are not the same trials. So whenever a drug has a primary toxic effect or has an effect on any genetically modified targets, we need patients. Then it is not justifiable to have an impact on healthy volunteers that might be long-lasting or forever lasting. For all other drugs, and they might also have side effects. You might expect side effects from certain drugs as long as they are not primary toxic and as long as they are not a targeted therapy. We normally are obliged to start with healthy volunteers, and the agencies are pretty strong on that. The question how many trials we do with healthy volunteers and how many trials we do with patients is difficult to answer because this varies from time to time. Healthy volunteer trials are not running all the time. They are normally over they have a high number of participants, but within a shorter period of time. Whereas, of course, especially the oncologic trials are running throughout the year. So I would say if you look in the last 5 years, we have about 25% healthy volunteer trials and 75% patient trials. And of course, being a trial unit within the university hospital in the middle of the medical department, we qualify for patient trials. That's why this is, meanwhile, the primary focus. For very big numbers of healthy volunteer trials, we are not big enough. There are commercial units who do that faster and cheaper than us. But for the campus translations, we would most of the time maybe not be able to pay such an outside unit. And for the campus trials, we are very important to conduct the first in human trials. And for questions on drug interactions, drug variability, and so on that are conducted sometimes also with licensed drugs. This is also an important part of our work here.
So to add the questions given to me, the proportion for IITs phase one or what kind of IITs we do, most of them are phase 2 or 3. We do not have real phase 4 studies. Those studies are often organized due to register, and later on you look at the data. But what we really support are mostly phase 2 and 3 studies. 50% of those studies are oncology, and very often phase 2 with drugs already on the market, as Antje mentioned before, and where we look, for example, on special populations. The question how the companies or how these studies are supported, I think that was the third question. We have a lot of funding by government for academic clinical trials, but this differs sometimes. And you, of course, you have to apply for it in a very difficult way, and about 10% of the applications are successful, only 10%. What we noticed during the last years, as Antje mentioned, that we have a few trials that are supported very well by pharmaceutical companies, also IITs. That's the reason why I presented to you the slide with the different ways of IITs, because this is really an issue at the campus, that we have real IITs supported by company, and later on you discuss about second right to use the data by a company. And on the other hand, trials that are supported from the beginning on by the company, and they want to know the data, they want to use the data for regulatory purpose. And then you have really to ask yourself whether this is an IIT and you want to conduct it as an IIT, because the full responsibility and liability is by the university hospital or the investigator. But we have such trials, and then we are talking really about a lot of money. Those are more million euros for the funding of such studies. Okay, I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
好，谢谢布兰克教授和卢斯教授哈。那么下面有请山东省泰安市中心董理主任分享。
I'd like to hand over to Director Dong Li from Taiwan City Central Hospital to share his insights with us.
董主任在吗？
Professor Dong, are you online?
申瑞你好，我是来自泰安市中医院机构办公
I'm from the Taiwan City Central Hospital. So I actually received pharmacology training at the provincial hospital. So some of the other panelists who are present today are actually my mentors. So for this question, how to strike balance between further innovation and ensuring patients' safety. Well, to be honest, I don't have personal insights to share with you regarding this question. However, from the two speakers' talk, I do have many important takeaways. Actually, for GCP and IIT, I do have a lot of personal experiences actually together with the university hospitals. And also for the teaching hospitals at those advanced countries, we do have a huge gap, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but I noticed that in Professor Lu's talk, the IIT's ratio to the sponsor initiated trial, it is 9-1. However, in China, we do have huge different distinctions between the IIT and the GCP, and of course it should be done under the GDP structure actually for IIT. I mean, for the funding part and the sponsor protection, to be honest, in China we still have a lot of challenges. And for IIT, in the two speakers talk, I see the future of our hospital because IIT is like the pearl on the crown. And so for the other ways of the trial, they basically offer us the methodology. And also, Professor Xin visited our hospital, saying that if you don't know how to do IIT, you can follow the GDP requirements. So I think this is my personal understanding of this question. And also, as the people, who attended this meeting, I also want to say something for Beijing, and I understand for the R&D they're the top 2 in China. And actually, in 2019, we had the collaboration, and firstly, we're not so qualified in the past. So I think maybe Beijing also missed the opportunity of having a very good partner. And also for several GDP studies, actually, we are like the top 3 in 3 trials and even top 1 in 1 of the trials. So, okay, that's all from me. Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor Dong. Now I will hand over to Professor Wang from Shandong Provincial Hospital. Good evening, everyone. I'm from the Shandong Provincial Hospital, and I'm Mr. Wang. I'm responsible for the pharmacological management for more than 10 years, and today I listened to Professor Luntz and Professor Blank talks. I have many important takeaways. So firstly, for the university hospital, for the legal department, safety center, as well as the pharmacovigilance, we understand that they also have set up the KKS, which is related with the training and education. They have very comprehensive infrastructure. I think this is well worth of learning. And also, we are enemies of the comprehensive infrastructure. So when available, we hope that we can have the opportunity to visit your hospital to have more learning at this site. So for this topic, how to strike a balance between fostering innovation and ensuring patient safety. Since 1999, we began to do clinical trials. We also accumulated a lot of experience, just like Professor Blank mentioned, for early clinical trials. Personally, I think there's very big prerequisite and core principle, namely to safeguard the safety of the subjects. So that's the main task of all the clinical trials. That's why for early phase clinical trials, we should also focus on this. Just like Professor Blank mentioned that we need to have the guideline formulation for phase 1 study. I mean, all these works have been centering around this topic. Just like Professor Su mentioned, actually in terms of the subjects selection, we also need to be cautious. For example, whether the investigator has experience in this early phase trial field, and also we need to do training upon the stakeholders. They need to have understanding of the mechanism and attack so that they get early detection of the possible AEs. Therefore, for the possible AEs and the side effects, they can take prompt mitigation measures. I also think that for ASCO committee review, this is also very important measure. In this review process, they should also pay special attention to subjects' safety and the reason or the feasibility and the rationality of the clinical trial protocol. I have a simple question for Professor Blank or Professor Luntz. In university hospital, for the recruitment of the phase 1 study, what are the main channels, including the patients as well as the healthy volunteers? So what are the main channels for the recruitment of phase 1 trial?
Yeah, maybe I can start to answer this question. Of course, it's different between healthy volunteers and patients. For patients, the main channel of recruitment is the population that we have within the hospital. And they come to the ambulatory clinics. They are maybe inpatients. Many of the trials that we have are quite for special indications because, this is a university hospital. And the patients for the Heidelberg University Hospital come sometimes from far away. Sometimes they come from the other end of Germany. Of course, Germany is much smaller than your country, but still, this is a long trip, and this is the primary source. And then, of course, we have the advertisements. Sometimes they are paid by the companies or even initiated by the companies through some commercial recruitment companies who have advertising in different social media and so on. It depends on the kind of disease that we are talking about. The less severe the diseases, the more we go into the social media advertising. And of course, in our university homepage, we have advertisements. And for some of the trials also, the community of a certain disease figures out there is a trial. We had, for example, a trial with a new drug for HSV. Herpes simplex virus 2 is the genital herpes virus, and we were flooded with people calling from everywhere. So sometimes the community itself also gets the idea there is a trial that might be helpful. And for healthy volunteers, it's just we have a good database of people that have already participated before. We, of course, consult this database, but students tend to move away, and we use social media and commercial advertisements.
Perhaps one additional aspect beside to recruit patients from outside, it is very important that you are able to contact the patient if you notice there is a potential patient in the clinic. And very often, of course, the patient has to be recruited at the end by the physician, by the principal investigator or the co-investigator who is familiar with the study and a medical doctor. He is the only person who is able to perform the informed consent process and to get informed consent. But to notice there are potential patients is a day-to-day business. And in some clinics, we organized it that there is a study nurse who knows every study that is actively recruiting, and then goes through the wards and the ambulatory department and looks which patients are new and looks through the files and decides whether the patients might be able to take part in the one or the other trial. And this study nurse can also contact the patient for first orientation for a first talk, whether he is in general interested to be part of the study or any study. And if the answer is yes, she or he can contact the physician and the co-investigator or PI and inform him there might be a patient to be contacted and please go to him or her. And this is very important that you have an active recruiting also for the patients that are already in the clinic, and that you are able to contact them when they are there and to give them the information for the study.
Thank you very much. It's a great panel discussion. Thank you for all panelists' great contribution. That marks the conclusion of our panel and also the conclusion of our conference. In today's conference, we have witnessed such a great academic feast and exchange. We have great talks and great discussions, very thought-provoking. And before we conclude our meeting, I would like to invite Professor Peng, Professor Wang, and Professor Steffen Luntz to give us a final conclusion remark. And they have provided really important guidance to our meeting and point a really good direction for our future studies. We'll start with Professor Peng from Qilu Hospital, please.
尊敬的 Steffen Luntz 教授，尊敬的 Antje Blank 教授，尊敬的各位嘉宾，
Distinguished professors,
同事们，大家晚上好。非常
Good evening to you all.
能够作为本次
Great pleasure to serve as the host for today's meeting, together with Professor Luntz. It's a great honor to co-chair this great meeting. And in this evening, we had such a great academic exchange. We listened to top-notch experts from both China and Germany to talk about holistic management of clinical trials. This is such a great opportunity for everybody. Qilu Hospital, Shandong University, as a tertiary level 3A general hospital, directly affiliated to Ministry of Education, is a leading hospital and research institute in China who has been continuously devoting ourselves in medical science and education. International exchange is really an important aspect for this. So hereby, I would like to sincerely welcome all of our guests from China and outside China. I would like to thank all the parties for participating in today's meeting. Tonight's academic exchange has inspired new thoughts. We'll definitely keep and move our new research to a new high level. Thank you. Thank you. And next, Professor Wang from Shandong Provincial Hospital.
尊敬的 Steffen 教授、Antje 教授，尊敬的
Distinguished Professors Luntz and Professor Blank, dear colleagues online, thank you very much. A great academic session focusing on clinical trial, particularly clinical trials with innovative drugs. Both speakers have given us comprehensive review of management of clinical studies. In big teaching hospitals in China, we have conducted more and more clinical studies with better and better standardization. However, the establishment of the structure and framework and quality control during study conduct, as well as issues we faced with during the study process would be considerable. And through today's academic exchange, a lot of questions are answered, solutions are proposed. Hopefully, in the near future, through online and on-site meetings, regarding clinical trials with innovative drugs, we can have more meaningful exchange and communications. Lastly, I would like to thank everybody for your participation. Thank you very much, both professors from Heidelberg University. You gave us a lot of constructive and valuable comments and suggestions. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wang. And next, we'll invite the co-chair of today's meeting, Dr. Steffen Luntz, to give us a concluding remark.
Yeah, thank you very much. Once again, it's an honor anyhow to have the opportunity to talk to you, for me and Antje. And it's also an honor to give the closing remarks. What I notice is that we are on the same side. We are working to make medicine better and to improve the safety and efficacy for our patients. And I think this is very good and worth to spend the time in it. And it was a pleasure today to be with you all over the world, from San Francisco to China. I know it's in the evening now to you. Thanks for being staying patient. And also we run a little bit out of time. And I would like at the end to thank the organizer for the great support in advance when we had to prepare our presentation. I think we I hope that we gave you the information that you expected and the deeper insights. And if you have any questions after that, we are glad to answer them also by email or so. And now I think I just wish you a nice evening, and thanks for your attention.
好，谢谢伦茨教授啊。
Thank you so much, Professor Luntz. Thank you so much, dear chairpersons, for your great closing remarks and wish. So that basically conclude our meeting, and we now have new motivation for the future. On behalf of the organizers, I would like to again thank you, all experts, organizers, our technical staffs, and everybody. Wish you everything. I wish you a good night and the best wishes for everything. We wish we could have more opportunities in the future to collaborate with each other. That concludes our meeting tonight. Thank you so much, everybody. See you next time.
癌症作为重病之王，几个世纪以来，成为威胁人类健康的世界性难题。在全球许多地区，治疗癌症的药物仍难以企及，令患者的抗癌之路步履维艰。百济神州作为全球肿瘤治疗创新公司，一直在不断尝试、探索。
Beijing is changing that. We've built a company differently from the very beginning. It's built to do great science and to deliver impactful medicines while also addressing affordability with strategic cost and time advantages.
百济神州的创立，就是为了帮助全球更多的患者和他们的家人。我们相信，通过推动生物医药研发模式的变革，我们能够为全世界的癌症患者带来更多可及可负担的创新药。
怀揣患者为先的使命，每一步跨越皆为患者全力以赴。为了研发出更多挽救生命的创新药物，我们不断突破生命科学边界，挑战未解难题。从实验室到临床，我们汇聚全球研发人才，打造了极具差异化的研发管线。通过兼具质量及效率的独特研发模式，将世界各地的患者纳入新药研发格局， 为了持续供应全球患者，我们构建了大规模智能化的全球产业化布局，严守世界一流的质量标准，星夜兼程，全力保障患者用药安心。为了令创新药物普惠全球，我们建立了科学为本的商业模式，核心自主研发药物百月泽、百泽安，不断开创零的突破，领航新药出海进程。在中国，我们全力推动医疗服务下沉基层，助力实现健康中国2030宏伟愿景。我们坚信，改变是治愈未来的良方。在百济神州，我们积极履行企业责任，以向善的力量努力回馈社会。为了每一次希望，每一份荣耀，全球百济人正在前赴后继。攻破癌症是一场持久战，秉持百创新药、济世惠民的初心，我们跨越国界，为改善全球健康携手奋进。我们坚信，终有一天，癌症将不再成为人类生命与幸福的威胁。